I'm still looking for Chris Brown and Rihanna to get a refund for my tickets for the pop concert in 2006. That doesn't make me happy today. If anyone was listening last time out, they'll know what I'm referring to, why this is important, why I feel ripped off. They'll also know a bit about homeostasis, which is going to help understand what I'm about to read from the very enjoyable With Joe Wehbe blog. Very insightful blog. I enjoy reading from time to time. So yes, I'll leave that there. You can help with that if you're so disposed. Okay, the Pleasure Treadmill. It's where a lot of humans live because they don't know any better. We're critically undereducated about our own happiness and sense of meaning, and that's being generous, because undereducation implies that some education is already taking place. And to be frank, I'm doubtful of that. Taking a depressed person to a rock concert. If you take a depressed person to a rock concert, you'll be sandwiching a brief episode of happiness with depression on either side. They're happy at the rock concert, but not before or after. It turns out happiness is tricky. There's two subtypes within happiness. Pleasure versus fulfillment. Pleasure is short-term, sporadic, and dissipates quickly. Pleasure is sex, drugs, and rock and roll, like quite literally. Fulfillment is more stable, ongoing, and enduring. Fulfillment is much closer to that thing we'd call a sense of meaning. Big difference, one that is important to know. Enter the Pleasure Treadmill. For those who don't understand the difference between pleasure and fulfillment, they are often left to question why they don't feel happy. The obvious tactic is to chase more of the pleasurable experiences. They ride the pleasure treadmill. In fancy terms, this is known as hedonism. The pleasure seeker takes a very unsustainable approach to filling the emptiness inside. They go from one taxing thrill to another. But no single pleasurable experience sustains us for very long. You are not happy in your 40s because you attended a rock concert or had a night out 20 years before. So the hedonist sees little other option but to up the intensity on the treadmill, cramming in more taxing experiences and raising the level of intensity. Their hope is that they can fill the gaps and overcome the build-up of tolerance to their pleasurable experiences. More money, more luxury clothes, more plastic surgery, more rock concerts, more sex, more drinking, more drugs, and harder ones. Because of the law of diminishing returns, more and more effort and cost goes into acquiring returns that get smaller and smaller in these areas as intensity is raised. It's what we call a diminishing return. Eventually we run out of energy, of gas, and fall flat on the treadmill. Why? Natural selection is this process that has been working diligently for millions of years to do one thing: help you survive long enough to pass on your genetic material. A few things are essential to this process: frequent feeding and sexual intercourse. If doing these things once was enough to fulfill you for a lifetime, well, in the game of evolution, you'd be David versus Goliath, but without the slingshot. You need to remember that natural selection does not care about making you happy. It cares about your genes. I'm going to repeat that. You need to remember that natural selection does not care about making you happy. It cares about your genes. It uses pleasure to manipulate your behavior towards this outcome. It's the carrot it dangles. For this reason, you will not find a good life on the treadmill. Jumping off the pleasure treadmill. Pleasure has its place, but is not sustainable. To jump off the pleasure treadmill, to get real movement instead of fakeness in life, you need to invest in fields that deliver ongoing fulfillment. I have a general rule of 3. Community and connection with others, 1. 2. Richly defined interests. And 3. Problems that are worth solving. And there's many, many more. But as usual, my frequent and boring advice is to observe the MVL, the minimum viable lifestyle, which we talked about, episodes 1 to 3, as the perfect starting point. Ooh, that's the blog, and that, my friends, is a juicy one, if I do say so myself. The implication for that. I had a friend of mine who used that article to explain to another friend they saw was clearly on the Pleasure Treadmill to give them clarity over their own life. And this is one of the things I talked about at the start of this series on how we're wired and meaning fundamentals. We have so many traps we get into in our bloody lives because we have no idea that this is actually how our mind works. It's so hard to identify this through your own observation and intuition. And I still want that refund from Chris Brown and Rihanna, but the truth is, the more and more you put into these pleasurable experiences, expecting them to make you happy when they're only short term. So that's the idea. That's the idea we talked about yesterday with homeostasis and the tightrope, right? Is that if you got lifelong meaning from going to one concert, having sex once, or eating once, then your body wouldn't be motivated to do the things that actually maintain your survival and maintain the survival of your species when it comes to sex. So expecting those one-off pleasurable things, which have a brief moment of whatever, I think dopamine is the main chemical in our brain, that then dissipates so it can motivate you to do it again. Well, the more and more you do it, the less and less return you get. It just works that way. So that's why the line in the blog is, you cannot have a good life on the Pleasure Treadmill. You'll notice this now. You're going to have some real wizard observation abilities now. You'll be able to see when people are on this treadmill because they have to keep topping up. They have to keep buying more clothes. They have to keep buying cars. They need to keep trading in for a younger, hotter model wife or husband or girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever. There's so many more drugs. You'll be able to spot when they lack substance in their life. Now, I refer to substance as the idea of when you're not doing the pleasure stuff, life comes to this little equilibrium that's never 10 out of 10. It's almost impossible to maintain 10 out of 10, but it comes to this equilibrium. So when the equilibrium's shit, people go for pleasure activities because it seems like the way to go. That's the low-hanging fruit. But really, how do we raise the fulfillment steady tightrope that you can always flicker with pleasure activities, but it will never stay, it will never keep it high or low. How do you actually raise that tightrope, that baseline? So pleasure versus fulfillment, two different things. And I gave a bit of an insight. This is meaningful work versus work that's just for a paycheck. It's casual sex versus, loving relationship, committed intimacy and affection. Right? It's sometimes there are some things that can fall into either category. So what I recommend doing, what I did for this episode, is actually wrote a list. And this is the simplest way to do this. Line down a piece of paper, just like I've done here. Pleasure on one side, fulfillment on the other. I want you to list the things that give you pleasure, that make you happy for a brief second and then fade, and the things that give you fulfillment. I'm going to talk about how I classified certain things. These are things in my life right now, things that I've maybe even cut out on the pleasure side. Drinking friends, people that are only really friends when I go out with them. Doesn't mean that they don't have more value to them, that I wouldn't enjoy a sober conversation or activity with them, but the main interaction is just drinking. So those friendships often lack substance. You often don't get support. Then you get over here not knowing what's wrong with you, thinking, I've got friends, but you don't really have friends. You've got going out friends. The substance is not there. So it's like they're like a pleasure experience to you. Money. Pretty much always, for me, a pleasure thing. Getting a one-off hit of money, yeah, cool. But having my MVL funded, minimum viable lifestyle funded, different. That gives me ongoing peace. Actually gives me a little bit of fulfillment knowing I don't have to struggle to eat. So it's good. I talked about the sex examples. Another one. Food is a pleasure activity. It doesn't give me meaning. I love a good meal, but it's a pleasure activity. Karaoke. So I will talk heaps about karaoke if I hadn't already. It's mentioned in Gillage. Karaoke, lots of fun with the friends. last Saturday of the month when there's no bloody COVID on. Though, what I'll say, what's important to note is that pleasure is not bad. Just can't put too much expectation on it. So I still have things in my life that give me pleasure, but I'm not on the pleasure treadmill. Things that provide more fulfillment. I mean, writing this podcast now, I'm doing this not knowing if anyone ever listened to it, but I enjoy doing it. And it's ongoing. It's very durable. So it's quite a fulfillment activity. I think about it even when I'm not doing it. And the thought of it makes me happy and excited. Having like-minded friends as opposed to just drinking friends. People I have long-form conversations with, right? Who, whenever I see them, they just automatically make me feel really happy and content just being in their presence. Clear thinking. Not letting a lot of this clutter get in keeps the tightrope very balanced. And that's what I talked about in the last episode. The animals that we probably look down on in nature, thinking what a basic life they live. But they only need the pleasure. They only need the pleasure thing because their lives are otherwise good. They're sorted. They don't need the meaning fulfillment part. That's just a human problem. We're the ones that commit suicide, not the animals. Write your list. Bloody hell, just do it. If you've only got things on the pleasure side, all right, that's okay. But remembering the minimum viable lifestyle, honestly, go back, read the blog. I'm not selling you anything. That's free, right? Blog, podcast episode. Just looking at what the essentials are, what you need so that the crap doesn't come in. That's honestly, it really aligns. Not getting caught on the pleasure treadmill. The other thing, because we always talk about how can we use this knowledge, insight to open doors for self, but also for others, because remember, the best way to open 1,000 doors for you is to concentrate on opening doors for others, is to even get them to do their own list. You can compare them. It's a pretty non-obtrusive way to kind of get someone to think critically about their life. It's not really that deep, like asking them to meditate with you, which might be harder to get certain people to do, but that's something you can also try as a not so intense way of getting people to think about their life a bit more critically. So the big takeaway today was that pleasure and fulfillment are two different ends of the spectrum, of the happiness spectrum, if you will. And that a good life is not to be found on the pleasure treadmill. You need to put fulfillment activities, or sources rather, not activities, into your lifestyle. Clear? Good. Glad. I've reminded you about the doors, so that's all good. If you want to read more on the pleasure treadmill, you can head to the blog post. Just Google it. But the website is www.withjoewehbe.com. Thanks, guys. I look forward to talking to you next time. This has been the With Joe Wehbe Podcast.